Nora thought she had it all: love, luxury, and a perfect plan. One dinner, one sentence, and her world unraveled. Jake's calm stare hid a secret that would turn her betrayal into her downfall. Buckle up for a story of trust shattered, justice served, and a twist you won't see coming. Nora slid the roasted chicken onto the plate with a practiced flick of her wrist, her fingers steady despite the pulse hammering in her throat. The San Francisco penthouse kitchen gleamed under soft lighting, but she barely noticed the granite countertops or the city skyline beyond the window. Her focus was on the dining table, where Jake sat scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm she was about to unleash. She set the plates down, the clink of porcelain sharp in the quiet room. 2 glasses of wine, poured moments ago, stood untouched, their surfaces catching the dim glow like a warning. "Looks great," Jake said, his voice warm, almost too casual. He pocketed his phone and leaned forward, elbows on the table, his easy smile cutting through the tension she felt coiling inside. Nora forced a nod, her lips curving just enough to mirror his calm. She sat across from him, her chair creaking faintly, and picked up her fork, though her appetite had vanished hours ago. The weight of her decision pressed against her chest, a secret she'd carried for weeks, now clawing to escape. Jake sliced into his chicken, chewing thoughtfully, his gaze drifting to the window where city lights flickered. "Long day?" he asked, his tone light, inviting her to fill the silence. Nora's fingers tightened around her fork, the metal cool against her skin. She speared a piece of asparagus but didn't lift it, her eyes locked on the plate. "Same as always," she replied, her voice clipped, betraying the rehearsal she'd done in her mind. She needed to steer this moment, to control it. The clock on the wall ticked, each second amplifying the pressure in her chest. Jake sipped his wine, his movements unhurried, as if this were any other Thursday night. Nora's heart raced. She couldn't wait any longer. She set her fork down, the clatter louder than intended, and leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "Jake," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her gut, "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. She watched him, expecting shock, maybe anger, something to crack his calm exterior. But Jake didn't flinch. He lowered his fork, his movements deliberate, and met her gaze with eyes that seemed to see straight through her. No widened pupils, no clenched jaw, just a stillness that made her stomach lurch. "I figured," he said, his voice low, almost too even, like he'd been waiting for her to say it. Nora blinked, caught off guard. She'd braced for a fight, for tears or accusations. But this? His calm was a wall she couldn't scale. "What do you mean, you figured?" she pressed, her tone sharpening. She leaned closer, searching his face for a crack, a hint of the pain she'd imagined inflicting. Jake tilted his head, studying her as if she were a puzzle he'd already solved. "You've been distant, Nora, checking your phone at odd hours, working late with Ethan." He paused, letting the name linger, heavy with implication. Her breath caught. Ethan, her boss, her secret. She'd been careful, discreet meetings in Tahoe, encrypted messages, but Jake's steady gaze made her feel exposed. She forced a laugh, sharp and dismissive. "You're paranoid," she said, waving a hand, but her fingers trembled slightly, betraying her. She grabbed her wine glass, the liquid sloshing as she took a quick sip to steady herself. Jake didn't respond, just watched her, his silence louder than any accusation. He leaned back, folding his hands on the table, his posture relaxed but his eyes unyielding. "You forgot about the prenup, didn't you?" he said, his voice soft but cutting, like a blade slipped between ribs. Nora's grip on the glass tightened, her knuckles whitening. The prenup. That day in Napa Valley, for years ago, flashed in her mind. Her laughter, the sun warming her shoulders as she signed the document, dismissing it as a formality. She'd been so sure of their love, so blind to its consequences. Her mouth went dry. "That's your answer? A piece of paper?" She snapped, her voice rising, trying to regain control. She stood, pacing to the window, the city's glow mocking her unraveling plan. Jake didn't move, didn't raise his voice. "It's not just paper, Nora," he said, his tone steady, almost regretful. "It's a promise you broke." His words hit harder than she expected, each one chipping away at her confidence. She turned, glaring at him, her hands clenched into fists. "You think you've got me cornered?" she said, her voice low, venomous. She stepped closer, leaning over the table, her shadow falling across his untouched plate. "I built this life with you. I deserve something." Jake's eyes didn't waver, but a faint smile touched his lips, not cruel but knowing, as if he'd already seen the end of this game. "We'll see," he said, standing slowly, his height looming as he gathered his plate and walked to the sink. Nora watched him, her pulse pounding in her ears. The clink of his plate in the sink felt like a gavel, sealing the moment. He turned, wiping his hands on a towel, and met her gaze one last time. "I'm just getting started," he said, his voice calm but weighted with a promise she couldn't yet grasp. He walked out of the dining room, leaving her alone with the cooling food and the echo of her own words. For the first time, Nora felt the ground shift beneath her, the certainty she'd clung to slipping away like sand. Nora stood frozen in the dining room, the echo of Jake's parting words, "I'm just getting started," ringing in her ears. The San Francisco skyline glittered beyond the window, indifferent to her unraveling. She gripped the edge of the table, her nails digging into the wood, as her mind raced to reclaim control. He knew about Ethan. How? She'd covered her tracks, burner apps, late-night meetings in Tahoe disguised as work trips. Yet Jake's calm certainty gnawed at her, a predator circling its prey. She stormed to the kitchen, splashing water on her face from the sink where Jake's plate still sat, unrinsed. Her phone buzzed on the counter, Ethan's name flashing. She hesitated, then answered, her voice a hushed snap. "What do you want?" Ethan's tone was urgent, clipped. "We need to talk. Now." She glanced at the empty doorway, half expecting Jake to reappear, and agreed to meet at a dive bar in the Mission District, far from their usual haunts. The bar smelled of stale beer and regret. Ethan sat in a corner booth, nursing a whiskey, his usual charm replaced by a nervous twitch. Nora slid in across from him, her posture rigid. "Jake knows," she said, her voice low, cutting through the bar's hum. Ethan's glass paused midair, his eyes darting to hers. "How much?" he asked, leaning forward. She recounted the dinner, Jake's mention of the prenup, his cryptic confidence. Ethan cursed under his breath, rubbing his temples. "If he's got proof, we're screwed," he muttered. Nora's stomach twisted. She'd underestimated Jake, assuming his tech-obsessed focus left him blind to her moves. Now, Ethan's panic fueled her own. "We need to act fast," she said, her mind spinning through options. "Find a lawyer, challenge the prenup, something." Ethan shook his head, his voice bitter. "You don't get it, Nora. My wife, Lauren, she can't know. My career's on the line." His selfishness stung, but she swallowed her retort, knowing she needed him to navigate this mess. Back at the penthouse, Nora couldn't sleep. She paced the living room, the city's glow casting long shadows. The prenup haunted her, a document signed in a haze of love and wine, its clauses now a noose. She dug through a drawer, pulling out old files, her hands trembling as she found the contract. Pages of legal jargon stared back, each line a reminder of her naivety. Separate assets, no alimony in case of infidelity. Jake's foresight was ruthless. She slammed the file shut, her breath ragged, and called her friend Mia, a corporate lawyer. Mia met her the next morning at a crowded coffee shop in Soma. Nora slid the prenup across the table, her voice urgent. "Tell me there's a way out." Mia's eyes scanned the pages, her expression darkening with each clause. "This is airtight," she said, pushing the document back. "If Jake has evidence of an affair, you get nothing. Not the house, not a dime." Nora's chest tightened. "He's bluffing," she insisted, but Mia's skeptical look silenced her. "Get ahead of this, Nora. Talk to him before he lawyers up." Nora returned home, her resolve hardening. She texted Jake, demanding a meeting, but his reply was curt. "Talk to my lawyer." Her phone pinged again, an email from Olivia Chun, Jake's attorney, requesting a meeting downtown. Nora's pulse spiked. Olivia's reputation was brutal, a shark in San Francisco's legal waters, known for shredding opponents in court. Nora ignored the email, her pride flaring. She wasn't ready to face that battle yet. Instead, she drove to Jake's startup office in Silicon Valley, a sleek building humming with ambition. She marched past the receptionist, who tried to stop her, and found Jake in a glass-walled conference room, pitching to investors. He glanced up, his expression unreadable, and excused himself. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. Nora stepped closer, her tone sharp. "You think you can scare me with a lawyer? I deserve half of everything." Jake's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You deserve what you earned, Nora." Her anger flared, but his calm doused it with dread. "I know about Ethan," he said, his words precise, cutting. "I've known for months." He pulled out his phone, swiping to a photo, a grainy shot of her and Ethan at a Tahoe cabin, her arms around him. Nora's knees buckled, but she caught herself on the table. "Ow!" she whispered, her voice breaking. Jake pocketed the phone, his gaze steady. "You weren't as clever as you thought." He turned back to the conference room, leaving her standing there, the weight of her choices crushing her. That night, Nora sat alone in the penthouse, the photo burned into her mind. She called Ethan, her voice shaking. "He's got pictures. We're done if this gets out." Ethan's silence on the line was deafening. "I'll handle it," he said finally, but his tone lacked conviction. Nora hung up, her hands trembling. She opened her laptop, searching for ways to break a prenup, but every article echoed Mia's warning. Infidelity clauses were ironclad. Her phone buzzed, a text from Olivia Chun, scheduling a court date. The words blurred as panic set in. Jake, meanwhile, met Olivia at her downtown office. She spread documents across the table. Texts, photos, timestamps of Nora's secret trips. "She's got no case," Olivia said, her voice crisp. "The prenup holds, and the evidence buries her." Jake nodded, his face neutral, but his hands clenched briefly, betraying a flicker of pain. He'd loved Nora once, trusted her, built a life with her. Now, he was dismantling it with the same precision he'd built his company. "Move forward," he said, signing the legal papers, his signature steady. Nora's phone rang again. Ethan, sounding frantic. Lauren's asking questions. She found a receipt from Tahoe. Nora's heart sank. The walls were closing in, and Jake's quiet strategy was unraveling her life faster than she could counter. She stood, pacing, her mind racing for a way to fight back, but every path led to the same truth. Jake had outplayed her, and the game was far from over. Nora stepped into the San Francisco courthouse, her heels clicking on the marble floor, each step a battle to project confidence. The summons had arrived like a guillotine, setting a date that loomed over her sleepless nights. She'd spent weeks scouring the prenup, consulting lawyers, but none could crack its ironclad terms. Now, in the crowded courtroom, she faced Jake across the aisle, his posture relaxed, his gaze fixed on the judge's bench. Olivia Chun, his lawyer, sat beside him, her sharp eyes scanning a thick dossier. Nora's attorney, a wiry man named Greg Harper, leaned close, his voice low. "Stick to the script. Play the devoted wife." She nodded, her throat tight, and adjusted her posture as the judge entered. A stern woman with gray hair pulled tight, her presence commanding silence. The hearing began, and Greg called Nora to the stand. She stood, smoothing her hands on the table, and walked forward, her heart pounding, but her steps deliberate. She swore the oath, her voice steady, and launched into her testimony. "I gave everything to this marriage," Nora said, her tone measured, tinged with rehearsed sorrow. She described years of supporting Jake's startup, hosting dinners for investors, sacrificing her own ambitions. Her words flowed, painting her as the loyal partner, wronged by a cold husband. She glanced at the judge, noting the slight nod, and felt a flicker of hope. The courtroom listened, rapt, as she wove her narrative, her hands gesturing subtly to emphasize her sacrifice. For a moment, she believed she could sway the outcome. Greg stepped back, satisfied, and the judge turned to Olivia. "Your response, Miss Chun?" Olivia rose, her movements precise, and approached the bench, holding a sleek tablet. "We have evidence that challenges Ms. Nora's account," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Nora's pulse spiked. She gripped the edge of the stand, her knuckles whitening, as Olivia tapped the tablet, projecting images onto a screen. The first was a text message, time-stamped late at night. Nora to Ethan, explicit, unmistakable. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Ms. Nora, did you maintain an extramarital relationship with Ethan Carter?" she asked, her tone sharp, unyielding. Nora's mouth went dry, her carefully crafted composure cracking. She opened her lips to deny it, but another image flashed, a photo of her and Ethan, arms entwined, outside a Tahoe cabin. The courtroom murmured, the sound a wave crashing over her. She stammered, "That's not. It's taken out of context." But her voice faltered, weak against the evidence. Olivia didn't pause. She swiped again, revealing a string of messages, each more damning. Plans for secret trips, confessions of feelings, promises to leave Jake. The judge's gaze bore into Nora, who felt her legs tremble, her hands clutching the stand to stay upright. "These are authentic?" the judge asked Olivia, who nodded, presenting metadata logs. Nora's eyes darted to Jake, seeking a reaction, but he sat still, his face a mask of calm, as if watching a play he'd already scripted. Greg jumped up, objecting, his voice strained. "This is irrelevant to the prenup's validity." The judge silenced him with a raised hand, her focus on the screen. Another photo appeared, Nora and Ethan in a San Diego hotel, laughing, oblivious to the camera. Nora's stomach churned. She hadn't known Jake had hired someone, likely a private investigator, to trail her. The evidence piled up, each image a nail in her case. She sank back in her seat, her breath shallow, as Greg whispered, "We're losing this." Olivia addressed the judge, her voice steady. "The prenuptial agreement explicitly states that infidelity nullifies any claim to Mr. Jake's assets, including the Pacific Heights residence and his company's profits." She handed over a copy of the contract, its pages marked with highlighted clauses. The judge skimmed it, her expression unreadable, then turned to Nora. "Do you dispute the authenticity of this evidence?" she asked. Nora shook her head, her voice gone, her defiance shattered. Jake finally met her gaze, his eyes not angry but resolute, carrying the weight of months of silent preparation. Nora realized then. He'd known from the start, letting her dig her own grave while he gathered proof. The judge cleared her throat, her voice booming. "In light of the evidence, the prenuptial agreement is upheld. Ms. Nora will vacate the primary residence within 30 days, with no claim to Mr. Jake's assets or alimony." Each word hit Nora like a physical blow, her vision blurring as the reality sank in. Greg slumped beside her, muttering about an appeal, but Nora barely heard him. The courtroom seemed to tilt, the murmurs of spectators fading into a dull roar. She stared at the screen, where her own words betrayed her, a digital confession of her betrayal. Jake stood, gathering his papers, and walked past her without a glance, his steps measured, purposeful. Olivia followed, her tablet tucked under her arm, already preparing the next legal move. Nora remained seated, her hands trembling in her lap as the courtroom emptied. The weight of her choices pressed down, inescapable. She'd walked in believing she could outmaneuver Jake, claim a share of his empire. But now she faced the truth. He'd been 3 steps ahead, his silence a strategy, his evidence a checkmate. As the judge's gavel fell, finalizing the ruling, Nora felt the life she'd planned slip away, leaving only the stark reality of her defeat. Nora drove back to the Pacific Heights penthouse, her hands gripping the steering wheel, the judge's ruling echoing like a drumbeat in her mind. 30 days to vacate, no assets, no alimony. Her carefully crafted future had collapsed in a single courtroom session. She parked in the garage, the hum of the engine fading into silence, and sat motionless, staring at the concrete wall. Her phone buzzed, Ethan's name flashing, but she ignored it, her fingers trembling as she shut off the device. She couldn't face his panic now, not when her own was suffocating her. Inside the penthouse, she dropped her keys on the counter, the clatter sharp in the empty space. She moved to the study, yanking open drawers, searching for anything to salvage her position. Bank statements, property deeds, all in Jake's name, untouchable. She sank into a chair, the prenup's clauses flashing in her memory, each one a door slamming shut. Her last hope was Ethan, but his earlier fear at the bar gnawed at her. Would he stand by her or cut and run? She powered on a laptop, desperate for a plan, and emailed another lawyer, a high-profile litigator in Oakland. His response came within hours, a polite but firm refusal, citing the prenup's airtight language. Nora slammed the laptop shut, her breath hitching. She paced to the window, the San Francisco skyline mocking her with its indifference. Her social media notifications pinged, friends, colleagues, acquaintances, all whispering about the courtroom drama. The news had spread, her reputation unraveling like a loose thread. Meanwhile, Jake settled into his Silicon Valley loft, a minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking tech campuses. He met with Olivia Chun over coffee, her tablet open to a timeline of next steps. "Nora's got no leverage," Olivia said, sipping her espresso. "The court's order is final." Jake nodded, signing off on paperwork to secure his assets. His phone buzzed, a message from an investor praising his startup's latest pitch. He replied, his focus unwavering, but a flicker of weariness crossed his mind. This wasn't victory, just necessity. Nora, desperate to regain ground, called Ethan again. He answered, his voice strained. "Lauren knows," he said as words rushed. "She found my texts. She's leaving me." Nora's heart sank, but she pressed on. "We can still fight this. Get a lawyer, back me up." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Back you up? I'm on a job. HR got an anonymous tip. Photos, messages, everything." Nora froze, her phone slipping slightly in her hand. Jake, he'd sent the evidence to Ethan's company, dismantling his career with surgical precision. She hung up, her mind racing. She grabbed her car keys and drove to Ethan's office in downtown San Francisco, hoping to confront him, to strategize. The receptionist blocked her, citing security protocols. Through the glass doors, she saw Ethan clearing out his desk, his shoulders slumped, colleagues avoiding his gaze. Nora turned away, her chest tight, and headed back to the penthouse. The drive felt endless, each red light a reminder of her shrinking options. Back home, she rifled through her emails, finding one from Olivia Chun, a formal notice to vacate by the court's deadline. Nora's hands shook as she opened it, the legal language cold and final. She tried calling Jake, but his number went to voicemail, his silence a wall she couldn't breach. In a last-ditch effort, she texted Mia, begging for advice. Mia met her at a quiet diner in the Marina District, her expression grim. "Move on, Nora," she said, stirring her tea. "You can't win this. Start over." Nora shook her head, her voice sharp. "I'm not giving up." Days bled into nights, each one heavier. Nora stayed in the penthouse, clinging to the space as if it could anchor her. She packed half-heartedly, shoving clothes into boxes, her movements frantic. Neighbors' glances in the elevator stung. Word of her affair and the court ruling had spread like wildfire. She avoided their eyes, her pride crumbling under the weight of their judgment. Ethan stopped answering her calls, his social media accounts dark. She learned through mutual contact that Lauren had filed for divorce, citing the same evidence that had ruined Nora. Jake, meanwhile, finalized a deal with a major investor, his startup poised for a breakthrough. He worked late, his loft a hub of activity, but he kept Nora's betrayal at arm's length, focusing on what he could control. Olivia called with an update. Nora had hired another lawyer, a desperate move to delay the eviction. "It won't work," Olivia assured him, her voice confident. Jake nodded, his thoughts drifting to the life he'd once imagined with Nora, now a distant memory. On day 20, Nora sat alone in the penthouse, surrounded by half-packed boxes. She opened a bottle of wine, pouring a glass she didn't drink. Her laptop screen glowed with job listings. She need work soon, her savings dwindling. A knock at the door startled her. A courier handed her a certified letter, a reminder of the eviction deadline, 9 days away. She tore it up, her hands shaking, but the truth was inescapable. Jake's strategy had cornered her, and every move she made only tightened the noose. Nora stared at the city lights, her reflection faint in the glass. She'd gambled on a future with Ethan, on outsmarting Jake, but now she stood alone, her allies gone, her plans in ruins. The penthouse, once a symbol of her success, was now a countdown to her departure. As the clock ticked closer to the deadline, Nora felt the weight of her choices, each one a step toward a reckoning she could no longer avoid. On day 29, Nora stood in the Pacific Heights penthouse, surrounded by cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly against the bare walls. She zipped up her final suitcase, the sound sharp in the silent space, and placed the keys on the counter as the court had ordered. Her fingers lingered on the cold metal, a last tether to a life she'd lost. She glanced at the empty rooms, once filled with shared laughter, now stripped of her presence. With a deep breath, she walked out, the door clicking shut behind her, final and unyielding. She drove to a small studio apartment in Oakland, her new reality, a cramped space with a single window overlooking a noisy street. Unpacking her clothes, she found an old photo of her and Jake at a Napa winery, smiling, carefree. She tossed it into a drawer, unable to face the memory. Her phone stayed silent. Ethan hadn't called since his own life imploded. A news alert pinged. His company had fired him after an internal review, and his wife, Lauren, had moved out, taking their kids. Nora's chest tightened. Her choices had ruined more than just her own future. Meanwhile, Jake returned to the penthouse, stepping over the threshold with measured calm. He carried a small box of documents, setting it on the counter next to Nora's keys. The space felt different, lighter, as if her departure had lifted a weight. He opened his laptop, reviewing emails from his startup team. His company was launching a new app, InvestorBuzz growing. He replied with clear directives, his focus sharp, but paused to call a local charity. "I'd like to donate," he said, pledging funds to support betrayed spouses, a quiet act of closure. Nora spent her first night in the studio, scrolling job boards on a borrowed laptop. Her marketing skills were sharp, but her reputation, tarnished by whispers of the scandal, made every application a gamble. She drafted a resume, her fingers hesitating over each line, knowing employers might Google her name and find a courtroom story. A text from Mia offered coffee, but Nora declined, too raw to face sympathy. She needed work, a plan, anything to claw her way back from zero. Across town, Jake met Olivia Chun at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. She slid a final legal document across the table, confirming the transfer of the penthouse and all assets solely to his name. "Nora's out," Olivia said, her tone matter of fact. "No appeals filed." Jake signed the paper, his pen steady, and thanked her. As Olivia left, he lingered, sipping his coffee, his thoughts drifting to the early days with Nora, her ambition, her spark. He pushed the memory aside, focusing on the future he was building alone. Nora's second day in Oakland brought a call from a recruiter, a low-level marketing gig, far below her old role. She accepted, her voice tight, knowing it was a start. At the interview, she sat across from a skeptical manager, answering questions with forced confidence. "I'm ready to prove myself," she said, her hands clasped to hide their tremor. The manager nodded, unconvinced but willing to give her a chance. Nora left the office, the weight of starting over pressing down, but she kept walking, determined to rebuild. Jake, meanwhile, prepared for a press conference at his Silicon Valley office. His startup's app launch was drawing media attention, and he stood before reporters, his voice steady as he outlined its features. Questions about his personal life surfaced, but he deflected with a calm smile, redirecting to his company's mission. Later, he met with his team, brainstorming expansion plans, his energy infectious. His colleagues noticed a shift, less guarded, more open, as if shedding Nora's betrayal had freed him. Nora heard about the launch through a news article, Jake's face on her phone screen. She scrolled past, her jaw tight, and focused on her new job. Her first day was grueling, endless data entry, dismissive coworkers, but she gritted her teeth, refusing to quit. At night, she checked her email, finding a message from an old colleague offering a freelance project. She replied instantly, a flicker of hope igniting. It wasn't much, but it was a step, a chance to claw back her dignity. Jake's final move came quietly. He prepared 2 envelopes, one addressed to Ethan's former company's HR, another to Lauren. Each contained copies of the courtroom evidence, texts, photos, proof of the affair. He mailed them from a downtown post office, his expression neutral, no trace of malice. The envelopes landed like silent bombs. Ethan's company issued a public statement, confirming his termination for ethics violations. Lauren, already separated, filed for full custody, her lawyers citing the evidence to strengthen her case. Nora learned of Ethan's downfall through a mutual friend's text. She sat on her creaky bed, staring at the message, the sting of regret sharp. Her choices had sparked a chain reaction, destroying not just her life, but his. She deleted the text, her hands steady now, and opened her laptop to work on the freelance project. Each keystroke felt like defiance, a refusal to let her mistakes define her forever. Jake ended his day at the penthouse, standing by the window, the city lights sprawling below. He felt no triumph, only relief. A chapter closed, his life reclaimed. His startup thrived, his integrity intact, the truth his quiet ally. Nora, across the bay, worked late, her small apartment lit by a single lamp. She was starting from nothing, but for the first time, she faced the truth. Her actions had consequences, and redemption would come only through her own grit. The game was over, and while Jake stood tall, Nora took her first steps toward a new, uncertain path.